Something tells me I'm gonna have to make more skits, and I don't like it. Hello one, hello all, it's the most wish Bay a happy birthday, ghost of them all, Casper in the flesh, and it's time for a review of Eminem, The Death of Slim Shady, Coup de Grace. This is the 12th album from legendary rapper, producer, actor Eminem, delivering a concept album. And if you're familiar with Eminem's work from the beginning of his career, you would know that he is no stranger to controversy at all. And with this concept, he is at odds with his alter ego, Slim Shady, as they go back and forth, as Slim Shady is just absolutely hell-bent on getting them canceled. And honestly, I wasn't crazy about the comeback single Houdini, and honestly, in the context of the album, I'm still not that crazy about it, and I'll explain later. Now, this album is 20 tracks, over an hour, but I must say, even though I wasn't a fan of Houdini, I did enjoy Tobey, which was packed with Eminem's most clever bars yet, even though I was very skeptical because when Eminem opens up a line of abuse, I normally think it's just gonna lead into absolute cringe territory. But no, he actually came through with a clever bar here, where he goes, I can't help but feel like a victim of child abuse, because I'm about to get the goddamn belt. So the track is basically just showing his prowess and his stance in the game today, along with some great guest verses from Big Sean and also Babytron. And I will say Eminem's flows here are sounding a lot more fluid this time around. We are certainly getting a lot less garbage ass robot staccato sitting on the toilet flow, or pharmaceutical side effects commercial flow. So yes, there are moments of fluidity here, and Eminem does bring on some great features like Atlanta rapper Jid, absolutely killing it on the track Fuel, over these dramatic strings, crispy hi-hats. And when it comes to the concept, the overall concept of this album, on paper, I do think it's interesting to have a confrontation with Eminem and Slim Shady, where it's supposed to correlate to good and evil. And to me, I feel like if this album was that Slim Shady is going too far, and Eminem recognizes that he himself has gone too far, but you go further than Eminem, putting the brakes on a monster that's even bigger than him, this would have been better, I believe. But it's supposed to correlate to good and evil. And if you've been paying attention, if you've been listening to anything past the Marshall Mathers LP or Eminem show, you would see Eminem has a plethora of offensive bars under himself, Eminem, not the Slim Shady character. So to match them up and make them as polar opposites is pretty ill-conceived. And there's also songs attached to this that don't really make sense to me or fit in the context of the album and aren't really good features in the first place. Like on the track with the Jelly Roll sample, Somebody Save Me, or Temporary with Skylar Grey. And to have her on it, where Eminem drops a pretty edgy line towards her, wouldn't you want to bring her in and interact with her instead of just throwing on this tribute track and featuring her on it like you didn't say that at all? And look, as far as the sentiment goes, I think it's cute, I think it's adorable, and there's a lot of apologies to family here, which is fine, which he's done in the past, where he's made amends with his mother. But wouldn't that make more sense to apologize to other people you've dissed on this album, such as marginalized groups like trans people, the mentally handicapped, quadriplegics, you know, since you've caped Eminem as this all-out good guy. But if I'm to go through this play-by-play, the Eminem does kick off where he's rapping about his rise to fame, and also dabbling into what made Kamikaze so obnoxious with his jab at critics, and how he blindly addresses the defenses to these albums that have been criticized that are either non-existent, subjective, or said by other rappers. Like, for me personally, I did not Might Delete Later. I honestly thought that was J. Cole's worst project yet. To me, I thought that was a lackluster placeholder album. And saying Kendrick's album didn't have any bangers, who with a platform is saying that? What is the large majority of people who are saying that? And then comparing an album that J. Cole knows was trash to an absolute classic like Enter the 36 Chambers, you really lost me there. Which leads me to ask, who is this really aimed at? Also, another thing too, with the existence of Slim Shady, he is a personification of Eminem's breaking point, of his vindictive ways. As I have heard this man say in the past, Slim Shady is a reaction to a volatile society. He is a hyper-reality to a vindictive scenario that Eminem has stemmed from experiences of people who have done him wrong in the world. And at this point, I feel like he's just being a bully here. And no, this isn't me just being sensitive or woke, I guess. I'm just pointing out a valid criticism of hypocrisy. Because to the best of my knowledge, the trans community, little people, people of size, handicapped people, and even Megan Thee Stallion have done nothing to Eminem, have done nothing wrong, nor pointing any allegations or misconceptions they may have with Slim Shady's music. That doesn't exist. Which was the main reason why there was a Marshall Mathers LP in the first place, was to basically shut people up for painting himself as this monster and also feeding into the negative feedback he was getting. But he's not really getting any negative feedback or people painting him into this bigoted corner. He's really just doing that himself here. So what appears to me is Eminem is just using this concept as an excuse to be edgy and a dick, which to me just comes off as super corny and just clinging to relevancy, especially when there's no motive to the bars, nor are they even good or funny or shocking at this point. And the only people I could see this type of moronic humor appealing to are 14-year-old edgelords who get jazzed off right-wing goons like Steven Crowder. And speaking of right-wing, he does take jabs at Candace Owens here, which he refers to as Clandis Owens, which has been used in left-wing circles, sure. But I will say it is refreshing to see him going at her, because she does strive to say a bunch of dumb, moronic, harebrained political shit, but again, also taking jabs at trans people, which Candace Owens has done relentlessly with a bunch of bigoted tropes, misinformation, and it seems the only trans person who he mentions here is Caitlyn Jenner. And look, I'm no fan of hers. I think she's a capitalistic NIMBY, pick-me, bigot, and a Trump sycophant. And I'm thinking, is this the only trans person he knows? And then he goes on Habits with his dumb bar saying, well, if Cartman said it, you guys wouldn't be upset. But the thing is, South Park is a cartoon, and it is a reflection of an extremist society where you know that it's satire, which actually makes fun of extremists and bigots. Where these bars here just make idiotic talking points that rival a moron like Tim Pool, and then manages to drop the worst rebuttals to misogyny here, saying, I can't be misogynistic. I got daughters who are graduates. Now, I will admit, the album does have its highlights. I think Brand New Dance is a cheeky banger, in a very Eminem kind of way, with a very off-kilter, kooky beat, Slick Rick style cadence, and it's pretty easy to see he's being silly here. Even if he is making light of Christopher Reeve, which is a joke in his discography that has been ran into the ground at this point, but I feel like he's really aware of that, with a collapsing sound, horses neighing, which leads to Eminem waking up and screaming as if he was having a nightmare after receiving this very threatening voicemail from Christopher Reeve. And also, I do enjoy Evil. That shows a hint of self-awareness here, as he shares his roots and his upbringing of what made him evil. From him being abused as a child, from society, problematic family members, and drugs. And I do enjoy the ominous hums that are just laced and streaming through the track. And also acknowledging Slim is certainly his sinister counterpart. And then we get a brief skit of Slim telling Eminem that he would be nothing without him, which leads to Lucifer, which takes a shot at Candace Owens, as I mentioned before, but simultaneously going after PC police, talking about how there's a death of free speech, which contradicts the Candace Owens diss, because while simultaneously you're talking about going after Candace Owens, but yet you're spitting talking points that she would agree with, which leads me to believe that this is just outrage filler, who he said he had no animosity for in the past, but this leads me to believe this is just some weird grudge and rebuttal to something he squashed in the past, so why bring it back now? I do think, though, he does do the alter ego angle better on Antichrist, and doing what Shady has done best in the past, which I certainly respect, in finding the humor at taking jabs at problematic figures, like Bill Cosby, Jeffrey Epstein, Diddy, which he also does on the following track, Fuel, and certainly more scathing and brutal wordplay that raises more awareness to the allegations of Diddy and his disgusting actions, and also taking much-deserved shots at murderous little weirdos like Kyle Rittenhouse. So yeah, certainly bars that I find enjoyment in, even if the bars on the previous track do warrant a little bit of an eye roll. And to M's credit, he does acknowledge how problematic Slim Shady is, and also learning how financially beneficial the persona is. And then there's Road Rage, which honestly just reads to me as the "Are you triggered? Are you offended? I'm aiming at fat people. Are you triggered?" When in actuality, there's nothing triggering about this. It's just very corny, underwhelming, and played out, which has been done by washed up comedians 1,000 times over. And there's also the identity crisis he has on Houdini, which is easily the worst track here, where it just sounds like he's run out of ideas and just disses Meg out of nowhere, which to me is just feeding into the incels in his audience. Which we know is no secret, Eminem hates his audience, so why would you cater to the crowd you hate and not take jabs at incels like Tory Lanez, who shot Meg? To me, he just took the coward's way out here. And then we got another trans bar, oh boy. Which is honestly so pathetic and tiresome at this point, where he's just really running out of ideas creatively here and just biting off Dave Chappelle. The whole thing sounds like a right-wing parody of Without Me. And after that, you would think this is the final track, which is Guilty Conscience 2. And I will say there is more self-awareness here. Eminem is fighting back against Slim and also making valid points, pointing out that he's become the monster that made him and calling out how hypocritical he is. And yes, there are corny jokes laced into this track and pretty much saying how corny he is for going after these marginalized groups and how the Slim Shady humor is just so flaccid and immature at this point. And I do love how the vocals and the production do intensify here, the legendary status, and apologizing for all the things he's been criticized for, which leads to Slim saying, "I'm sorry that Eminem's a puppet, I'm sorry that he's a hypocrite," and then just kills Slim right then and there. Which leads to it all being a dream, that Slim Shady was just going at these marginalized groups and it was all a nightmare, which leads to calling up his lawyer, Paul Rosenberg, saying how Slim possessed him to say all these egregious things, and then ends with Paul cursing him out and M laughing, which leads me asking, what was the point of all this? And then the song Head Honcho leaves us with these bars, basically saying M is gonna keep pushing buttons, and that this hasn't been a learning experience, at all. There's really nothing further to chew from here, and all this leads up to a bunch of songs that have nothing to do with the storyline. I think Tobey is a good song, but the album does end off with a bunch of tacked on tracks, and I mentioned it before. I mentioned how while I do enjoy the sentiment, the execution just leaves a lot to be desired. So while there are highlights here and moments here I do think are enjoyable, and overall I find this better than Kamikaze, and damn sure few cuts above the abomination that was Revival and Encore. However, do I think this is on the level of Eminem's first 3 LPs? Not really, no. And I feel the concept is an interesting one, but the narrative is just so ill-conceived. The execution is poorly done, and there's a lot of tracks here that could have been cut. So yeah, the direction gets pretty lost here. And while I do think this is Eminem's most listenable album in a while, I still find myself, as a concept album, putting it in that context, underwhelming. And overall, unimpressed. So yeah, I'm on the fence with this. I don't think it's a terrible album, but I don't think it's a great album. And I think M could have done better. I'm feeling a 2.5 out of 5 on this album. But if you've given this a listen, what did you think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? That's it. Caspa, Gothic Ghost, Eminem, Death of Slim Shady, Coup de Grace. Till we meet again.